Father, can we choose her? Lyra's voice carried clearly through Black Spire Market's din. Precise, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Daughter, she's chained. Alaric's response came automatically, the voice of a king accustomed to practical objections. That's why she needs us. Ellen's whisper held the devastating logic only a child could wield. The market beneath Black Spire keeps smelled of iron, old blood, and desperation dressed as commerce. Alaric Nocturne moved through the crowds with his daughters flanking him. Lyra on his left, 9 years old with eyes that missed nothing, and Ellen on his right, 7 and still young enough to believe mercy could win. Both girls wore traveling cloaks of deep violet, the royal color muted for this grim errand. Both had their mother's silver-streaked hair that hadn't touched their mother's face in 12 years. Welcome back, Story family. Today's tale is about chains that bind, love that breaks kingdoms, and 2 little girls who see truth, where kings see only law. If you're ready for a story that will grip your heart from the very first line, settle in, because this one's special. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing our global family come together. Now, let's begin. Alaric had come to this place for governance, not salvation. After the Treaty of Ashfall ended the Blood War, he'd buried himself in reconstruction, fortifying borders, rewriting laws, ensuring his daughters learned strength before they learned grief. But 3 weeks ago, when Ellen had reached for a court advisor and called her mother by accident, something inside Alaric's carefully constructed composure had shattered. He realized his daughters were growing up in a palace haunted by absence. They needed more than a king's discipline. They needed what he could no longer give them. The Crimson Council had codified captive markets as necessary stabilization measures after the war. Nobles with sufficient authority could purchase war prisoners and grant them restricted freedom in exchange for service. It was brutal. It was legal. It was, Alaric told himself, better than execution. He had authorized the market's existence. Today, he would exercise its purpose. Remember, he told his daughters as they approached the central platform, we are here to offer opportunity. We'll provide safety, position, and eventual autonomy. But you must be respectful. These are people, not possessions. Magistrate Kareen, a thick-necked vampire with amber eyes and rings on every finger, spread his arms in theatrical welcome. Your Majesty, such an honor. I have curated only the finest acquisitions for your consideration. Scholars, attendants, artisans. Whatever your household requires, I have the perfect solution. Alaric's jaw tightened. These weren't solutions. These were survivors. Show me those suitable for court service, he said quietly. Those who can read, write, and interact with children. Kareen clapped his hands. A dozen figures were brought forward from the holding pens, each wearing identification placards and wrist restraints. Alaric studied them, searching for something he couldn't name. Someone patient. Someone kind. Someone his daughters might trust with the soft parts of themselves they hid from him. A tall vampire woman with aristocratic features caught his attention first. She stood with rigid dignity despite her circumstances, her placard reading former council scribe. But when Ellen moved closer, the woman's expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. Contempt. The prejudice of the old families who believed royal blood had been diluted by war marriages. Alaric moved on. Next came a human scholar, male, with gentle eyes and trembling hands. He's terrified, Lyra murmured, her voice flat with disappointment. More than we are. She was right. The man flinched at every sound, his breath shallow with barely suppressed panic. Then a lycanthrope female approached, graceful and soft-spoken, who smiled at the children with genuine warmth. Alaric felt a flicker of hope until she spoke. I have 3 cubs of my own, Majesty, sold separately when our pack fell. I don't know if I could bear to nurture others while mine suffer in unknown hands. Alaric's throat closed. He turned to Kareen. Release her. Full pardon. Provide travel documents and funds to locate her children. The magistrate's smile twitched. Your Majesty, the cost is not your concern. Alaric freed 2 more in the next hour, a war medic with untreated wounds and an elder too frail for labor. His original purpose blurred with each act of mercy. His resources dwindled. Soon he'd have nothing left for the reason he came. Father. Ellen tugged his sleeve, her small face serious. You're helping them. That's good. But we came here for us, too. Alaric crouched down, running a hand through her silver dark hair. Sweetheart, I'm running out of authority to bend laws. Then maybe we don't need perfect, Lyra said, her voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. Maybe we just need someone who needs us, too. Kareen, clearly irritated by Alaric's humanitarian disruptions to profit margins, waved his hand dismissively. I have one more, but I warn you, Majesty, she's problematic. Violent. Uncooperative. I only retain her because she's strong enough for labor details no one else survives. He gestured toward a cage at the market's edge, where shadows pooled thick beneath sagging canvas. A figure sat there, chained not just at wrists and ankles, but at the throat and waist as well. Iron collar. Silver-laced bindings. The restraints of someone deemed extremely dangerous. As guards dragged her into the torchlight, Alaric saw why. She was a vampire warrior caste, her skin pale as moonlight, marked with scars that told stories of survival. Her hair fell in tangled auburn waves past her shoulders, streaked with silver at the temples. But it was her eyes that struck him, storm gray and fierce, burning with unbroken defiance despite the chains, despite the degradation, despite everything. She's killed 2 overseers, Kareen said casually. Refuses work assignments. Refuses submission. Honestly, I'm considering the arena pits. At least there she'd be profitable entertainment. The warrior woman's jaw clenched, chains rattling as she shifted. Her eyes found Alaric's across the space between them, and for a heartbeat, he felt the earth tilt. How did she come to be here? His voice came out rougher than intended. War captive. Taken during the siege of Thornhaven. She's been through 4 markets now. No one can break her spirit. She's worthless except as a curiosity. Thornhaven. The name hit Alaric like a blade between ribs. That was where. No. It wasn't possible. Every logical instinct screamed at him to walk away. Bringing an uncontrollable warrior into his home with 2 vulnerable children was madness. Recklessness. Dangerous beyond measure. But then Lyra and Ellen slipped free from his grip. Before he could stop them, they walked directly toward the kneeling warrior. Guards tensed. Kareen shouted a warning. The crowd gasped. The warrior woman stared at the children, her fierce mask cracking, confusion, then something raw and unguarded flooding her expression. Ellen, brave and impossibly small, reached out and touched one of the chained hands. You're very strong, she said softly. Why are you so sad? For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, impossibly, the warrior's storm-gray eyes filled with tears, the first vulnerability she'd shown since her capture. Her voice emerged hoarse, breaking with disuse and grief. I had daughters once. Before the war took everything. They would be about your age now. She swallowed hard, chains rattling with the tremor in her shoulders. I don't know where they are. I don't know if they survived. The market fell silent. Lyra and Ellen turned to their father simultaneously, their faces illuminated with a peculiar certainty only children possess, the kind of knowing that transcends logic and sees straight into truth. That one is ours, they said in unison, pointing at the chained warrior. Alaric Nocturne, who had commanded armies, who had signed treaties in blood, who had buried a queen and raised her daughters alone, stopped breathing, because he knew that stance, knew the way she squared her shoulders even in chains, knew the scar at her temple and the defiant tilt of her chin. He knew her, and if she was alive, everything he'd believed for 12 years was a lie. 12 years ago, Alaric Nocturne had made a choice that saved a kingdom and destroyed a man. The memory came unbidden as he stood frozen in Black Spire Market, his daughter's hands still pointing toward the chained warrior. The sounds around him, Kareen's protests, the crowd's murmurs, the rattle of chains, faded beneath the roar of blood in his ears. Thornhaven had burned for 3 days. The siege was supposed to be a strategic victory, the turning point that would end the blood war. Instead, it became a massacre. Alaric remembered smoke so thick it choked the moon. I remembered the screams of civilians caught between armies. Remembered searching through rubble and ash for any sign of her. Seraphine Vale, his queen, his wife. The woman who'd argued with war councils and kissed their daughters goodnight with blood still on her armor. She'd insisted on leading the eastern flank herself despite his objections, despite her pregnancy making combat reckless, despite everything. "I'm a warrior before I'm a crown," she told him the night before the battle. "Our daughters need to see that strength doesn't end where motherhood begins." Those were the last words they'd spoken without anger between them. The eastern flank fell first. 17 noble houses were confirmed dead. Seraphine's command post was found collapsed, burned beyond recognition. They'd recovered her seal ring from the ashes, melted, but identifiable. Nothing else remained. Alaric had wanted to search longer, wanted to tear apart every stone, interrogate every survivor, refuse the possibility that she was simply gone. But the war councils convened. The alliance was fracturing. Without a clear line of succession, without stability, the kingdom would splinter into feuding territories. "You must declare her dead, Majesty," High Chancellor Veridon had insisted. "The realm needs certainty. Your daughters need a living parent more than a ghost." So Alaric had stood before the Crimson Council 3 weeks after Thornhaven fell and spoken words that tasted like ash. "Queen Seraphine Vale is dead. Long may her memory guide us toward peace." He'd buried an empty coffin, raised 2 grieving daughters alone, signed the Treaty of Ashfall with hands that still reached for her in sleep. And he'd let grief harden him into something useful, something that could rule without feeling, command without hesitation, build a kingdom on the corpse of the one he'd lost. "Your Majesty?" Kareen's voice dragged Alaric back to the present. The magistrate was gesturing toward another candidate, a thin vampire with scholarly bearing, bowing deeply. "This one is exceptionally qualified. Former tutor to House Morwen. Patient. Educated. Perfect for her." "No." Lyra's voice was flat, dismissive. She didn't even look at the candidate. Her attention remained fixed on the chained warrior at the market's edge. Alaric forced himself to focus. This was madness. The woman in chains couldn't be. It wasn't possible. Thornhaven survivors had been accounted for. The dead had been mourned. 12 years had passed. But his daughters were pulling him forward now, their small hands insistent on his sleeves. "Father, please," Ellen whispered. "Can we talk to her?" Alaric's training as King Ward with the trembling in his chest. He should refuse. Should choose one of Kareen's safe, suitable candidates. Should protect his daughters from violence, from risk, from a warrior too dangerous to control. Instead, he found himself walking toward her. Up close, the details multiplied. The scar at her left temple, he remembered when she'd gotten that, sparring with her brother in the palace courtyard. The way she held her shoulders even while kneeling, proud, unbroken, exactly as she'd faced down war councils who'd tried to sideline her. The slight crook in her left hand where fingers had healed wrong after. No. This wasn't her. Couldn't be her. Seraphine had died at Thornhaven. He'd mourned her, moved forward, built a kingdom on that certainty. The woman's hair was tangled, matted with grime. Seraphine's had been silk smooth, always braided for battle. This woman's eyes held feral rage. Seraphine's had sparked with wit and warmth. This woman was a stranger who happened to share similar features, similar bearing, similar. She shifted, chains clinking, and rolled her shoulders in that distinctive way, a fighter's habit, testing range of motion even in restraints. Alaric's breath caught. Seraphine had done that. Every morning, every night, before every battle. The scars tell a story, don't they, Majesty? Kareen appeared at his elbow, oblivious to the war raging inside Alaric's chest. 12 years of captivity will do that. Break most people. But not this one. She's too stubborn to break. 12 years. The timeline matched. Where exactly was she captured? Alaric heard himself ask, his voice distant. Thornhaven Siege, according to her intake papers. Though she won't speak of it. Won't speak of anything, really. Just stares and fights, and... We want to give her a home. Lyra interrupted, her young voice carrying unexpected authority. Father, she's the one. Ellen nodded, solemn. She needs us. We need her. The warrior woman remained still, head bowed, breath steady despite the weight of chains. But Alaric saw the tension in her jaw, the controlled fury in every line of her body, the way she angled herself, even now, even chained, to keep the children in her peripheral vision. Protective positioning. A soldier's instinct. A mother's instinct.
No.
He was seeing ghosts. Projecting grief onto a stranger because his daughters wanted someone, anyone, to fill the void their mother left. This was desperation, not recognition. The woman in chains was not his wife.
She couldn't be.
Because if she was alive, if Seraphine had survived Thornhaven and spent 12 years in captivity while he declared her dead, remarried the kingdom to stability, raised their daughters to believe their mother was Ash. If she was alive, then he'd abandoned her. The thought was unbearable. So Alaric did what he'd done for 12 years. He buried it, locked it down, let the king's mask settle over the husband's breaking heart. Magistrate Kareen, he said carefully, tell me more about. The warrior woman lifted her head, slowly, deliberately, and met his eyes. Storm gray, unflinching, alive with recognition and rage, and something that looked devastatingly like hope. Time stopped. In that gaze, Alaric saw Thornhaven burning, saw their wedding beneath winter stars, saw Seraphine laughing as she taught Lyra to hold a practice sword, saw every moment he'd locked away in the tomb of moving forward. Her lips parted.
Cracked.
Barely a whisper, but it shattered him. Alaric. His name. In her voice. The dead had learned to speak. Seraphine Vale had learned to measure time in scars. The first year of captivity had carved lines across her shoulders, punishment for refusing to bow. The second year left marks on her wrists from escape attempts. By the third year, she'd stopped counting. The pain blurred together. The markets blended into one endless auction of humiliation. But she'd never forgotten how to fight. They called her unbreakable, violent, dangerous. The labels followed her from market to market like a curse. War captive, unstable, no lineage rights. Words designed to strip away everything she'd been, warrior, queen, mother, and reduce her to a problem no one wanted to solve. Seraphine preferred it that way. Better to be feared than pitied. Better to be dangerous than broken. She'd killed the first overseer who'd tried to force her into compliance. Snapped his neck with her chained hands before the shock collar could stop her. The second had learned caution but not wisdom. She'd waited 3 months before crushing his windpipe during a transfer. After that, they'd added more chains. Heavier restraints. Silver-laced bindings that burned against vampire skin. They thought pain would teach her submission. They were wrong. Pain was just another scar. Another mark of survival. She wore it like armor. When Magistrate Kareen had purchased her contract 6 months ago, he'd made his intentions clear. You're worthless as a servant. But perhaps the arena will find use for you. People pay well to watch beautiful things destroy each other. Seraphine had smiled at him. Cold, feral. Try it. See what happens. He'd backhand her for that. She'd spat blood at his feet and felt nothing but satisfaction. Now, kneeling in Blackspire Market with chains cutting into her throat, Seraphine listened to Kareen's performance with detached contempt. He was selling her again, framing her violence as spectacle, turning 12 years of survival into a commodity. She's killed 3 handlers, Kareen announced, lying as easily as breathing. It was two, but why let truth interfere with theater? Refuses to work. Refuses to submit. Honestly, I'm considering the gladiator pits for her. Seraphine kept her head down, breathing steady. Let them think she is cowed. Let them believe the chains held more than her body. She'd learned that stillness was its own weapon, patience sharpened by rage, waiting for the moment to strike. She heard footsteps approaching. Measured. Purposeful. Someone with authority. How did she end up here? The voice stopped her breath.
No, it couldn't be.
12 years and 4 markets had taught her that hope was more dangerous than any blade. Hope makes you vulnerable. Hope broke you more thoroughly than chains ever could. But she knew that voice. Had heard it in council chambers and bedrooms, in arguments and promises, in the last words spoken before Thornhaven fell. Her planet was conquered. She was a soldier captured in battle. Kareen's lies wrapped around her like smoke. Planet. Soldier. As if she'd been some nameless warrior from a forgotten skirmish. As if she hadn't been queen. She's been through 6 markets, and no one can break her. Because she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Because every time she was sold, she imagined it was one step closer to escape. One step closer to finding out if her daughters had survived. If they'd been raised believing she'd abandoned them. If he'd. She couldn't finish the thought. It hurt too much. Seraphine forced herself to remain still. Head bowed.
Chains heavy.
She'd perfected this performance over 12 years. Playing the dangerous animal just controlled enough not to be destroyed. It kept buyers cautious. Kept them from looking too closely at what lay beneath the violence. Then she heard the children. Small footsteps.
Light.
Curious. Before he could stop them, they walked right up to the kneeling Thraxian.
No.
Not children. She couldn't. They were right there. Close enough that Seraphine could smell youth and innocence, things she hadn't been near in 12 years. Her entire body tensed. Every instinct screamed danger. Not for her, but from her. She was violence personified. A caged weapon. These children shouldn't be near her. Guards shifted, hands on shock batons. The crowd murmured warnings. Kareen started to protest. But the children didn't run. One of them, small, brave, impossibly gentle, reached out and touched Seraphine's chained hand. The contact burned like absolution. You're very strong. Why are you so sad? The question broke something inside Seraphine's chest. Not her will, not her fury, but the walls she'd built around grief, around memory, around the part of her that had been more than warrior. She'd been a mother once. Her daughters had asked questions like that, had touched her hands with that same fearless trust, had looked at her scars and seen strength instead of monstrosity. Seraphine lifted her head slowly, chains rattling with the effort. The children came into focus. 2 girls, young, one with dark, serious eyes and one with an open, hopeful face. Both with silver-streaked hair. Both watching her without fear. Something twisted in Seraphine's chest. Recognition. Impossible recognition. The words escaped before she could stop them, hoarse and breaking. I had daughters once. Before the war took everything. They would be about your age now. Her throat closed around the rest. I don't know where they are. I don't know if they're alive. The unspoken truth hung heavy between them. The girls turned toward someone behind them, the man with the familiar voice, and spoke in unison. That one is ours.
Ours.
Not his. Not mine.
Ours.
Seraphine's gaze followed theirs, traveling up past merchant robes to a face she'd buried in memory. Older now. Harder. Wearing grief like a crown. Alaric. Time collapsed. 12 years vanished. She saw him as he'd been the night before Thornhaven, standing in their chambers, arguing about strategy, his hand protective on her barely showing belly. She saw him holding their newborn daughters, terrified and tender. She saw every moment that should have been. The timeline crashed into her like a physical blow. About your age now. Lyra would be 9. Ellen would be 7. These children were 9 and 7. These children called him father. These children were— "No," Seraphine whispered, the word barely audible. Her chains rattled violently as realization tore through her. No, no, no. Her daughters. Alive. Standing 3 feet away. Looking at her like she was a stranger. Because to them she was. They didn't know her. I didn't remember her. Had grown up without her while she rotted in markets and chains, believing them dead. Seraphine's eyes locked on Alaric's, storm gray meeting the gaze that had once promised forever, and she saw his recognition. Saw the moment he understood that she knew. That she remembered everything. Can we just take a moment to appreciate Lyra and Ellen? These two girls saw past chains, past fear, past everything the adults couldn't see, and they chose love. Comment below. Team Lyra or Team Ellen? Which daughter are you rooting for more? Or are you team both like me? While you're down there, hit subscribe so you're here for tomorrow's story. Trust me, you'll want to be. Now, back to the story. Lyra had always been able to see what adults tried to hide. She'd learned it from watching her father. The way his jaw tightened when counsels mentioned her mother, the way his hands clenched when he thought no one was looking, the careful distance he kept from anything that might feel like grief. Adults buried truth beneath duty and called it strength. Children knew better. So when Lyra looked at the chained warrior woman, she didn't see danger. She saw recognition. "Father," she said quietly, not breaking eye contact with the woman whose storm-gray eyes were filled with tears. "She knows us." "Lyra." Alaric's voice was strained, breaking on her name. "She does." Lyra stepped closer, ignoring the guard's warnings, ignoring Kareen's protests. "Look at her eyes, father. She's not looking at us like we're strangers. She's looking at us like someone remembering." Ellen, braver than her 7 years should allow, knelt directly in front of the chained woman. Up close, she could see the scars, the exhaustion, the way chains had rubbed skin raw. But she could also see something else, something soft beneath the hardness. "What were their names?" Ellen asked gently. "Your daughters. What were they called?" The woman's breath hitched. Her chained hands trembled. For a moment, she looked like she might shatter. "Lyra," she whispered, the words a prayer and a wound. "And Ellen. I named them for stars I'd never see again." The market seemed to inhale. Ellen's small face went very still. She turned slowly to look at her father, whose expression had gone bone-white. "Father, those are our names." "It's a coincidence," Alaric said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Common names. Many people." "Lyra means harp constellation in Old Valish," Lyra interrupted, her sharp mind cutting through denial like a blade. "You told us Mother chose it because she wanted us to remember we were part of something larger than ourselves." She pointed at the woman. "How many people know Old Valish naming traditions, father? How many war captives would name children after stars?" Seraphine was shaking now, chains rattling with the force of suppressed sobs. She stared at her girls, with an expression of such raw anguish that even the hardened market-goers shifted uncomfortably. "You grew," Seraphine breathed. "You grew so much. Lyra, you barely reached my knee and Ellen, you weren't even walking yet. You would just hold my finger and—" She stopped, bit down on the words before they could become a scream. "This is absurd," Kareen interjected, his voice sharp with nervous authority. "Your Majesty, the woman is clearly delusional. War captives often fabricate histories to gain sympathy. She heard the children's names and constructed a fantasy." "I was at Thornhaven," Seraphine said, her voice suddenly clear, cutting. "Eastern flank. My command post was overrun. I was captured in the collapse, dragged through smoke and bodies. They declared me dead because they found my seal ring in the ashes." She looked directly at Alaric. "But I'd given the ring to my lieutenant the day before. Told her to keep it safe until I returned. I never returned." The crowd was murmuring now. Market-goers pressing closer. This was better than theater. This was a royal scandal unfolding in real time. Alaric stood frozen, A king turned to stone. Ellen reached out and took Seraphine's chained hand in both of hers. Were you scared? The question, so simple, so childlike, seemed to undo Seraphine completely. Her fierce mask cracked, revealing the woman beneath the warrior. Every day, she admitted. Every single day. But I survived because I thought. Her voice broke. I thought if there was even a chance you were alive somewhere, I had to keep breathing. Even if I never saw you again. Even if you'd forgotten me. I had to survive, so that some part of me was still in the world with you. Lyra's eyes were burning with tears she refused to shed. We didn't forget. We just didn't know we were remembering. She turned to her father, and her voice carried the weight of accusation. Father, you told us Mother died at Thornhaven, that there was nothing left to bury. There wasn't, Alaric said hoarsely. I searched. For weeks. There was nothing. Because I wasn't there, Seraphine said, her voice gaining strength. I was already in chains. Already being moved through the first market. Already becoming property. The word property landed like a blade. Kareen sensed the shift, the way power was bleeding from his control into something more dangerous. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. If you wish to purchase this captive, we can complete the transaction quietly. But this public spectacle is necessary, Lyra said, her 9-year-old voice ringing with authority that silenced the magistrate. Because the truth shouldn't be quiet. Ellen stood, still holding Seraphine's hand. Father, you taught us that justice means doing what's right even when it's hard, even when it costs something. This woman is legally bound property, Kareen pressed, desperation creeping into his tone. The markets are sanctioned by the Crimson Council. You cannot simply. The Crimson Council serves the crown, Lyra said coldly. Not the other way around. Alaric finally moved. He stepped forward, close enough now that Seraphine could see the silver threading through his dark hair. The lines grief had carved around his eyes, the way he held himself like a man carrying impossible weight. Tell me, he said quietly, something only she would know. Something that can't be fabricated or guessed. Seraphine met his gaze. 12 years of rage and survival and buried love rose in her throat. When she spoke, her voice was steady, intimate, devastating. The night before Thornhaven, we stood on the eastern balcony. You put your hand on my stomach and asked if I was certain about leading the flank. I told you I was a warrior before I was a crown. You said, her voice softened, remembering. You said, you're my heart before you're either. The market went silent. Then you kissed my forehead and made me promise to come back. I promised. Tears tracked down her scarred face. I tried to keep that promise, Alaric. I tried for 12 years. His name, spoken in her voice after 12 years of silence, broke something fundamental in the careful order of his world. The king who had buried a queen heard the dead speak his name, and the dead were weeping. Alaric had spent 12 years building walls around his grief. In a single moment, Seraphine's voice demolished them all. Seraphine. He said her name like an invocation, like resurrection. His voice cracked on the second syllable, raw, unguarded, completely unmade. She stared up at him from her knees, chains heavy across her shoulders, and something in her expression shifted from fury to fragile hope. You remember. How could I forget? The words tore from him. How could I? He stopped, chest heaving, a king unraveling in front of his kingdom. They told me you were dead. They found your ring in the rubble. I searched for weeks, turned over every stone, questioned every survivor. There was nothing. I gave the ring to Mira Castellan, Seraphine said, her voice steadier now despite the tears. My second in command. Told her to keep it safe. When the command post collapsed, I was in the lower armory. The explosion buried us. By the time I dug myself out, your forces had already swept through. Enemy units captured the survivors. She swallowed hard. They separated us immediately, stripped our armor, removed anything that might identify rank or position. I became just another war captive. Just another, Her voice broke. They told me Thornhaven had fallen, that the royal family had been executed, that my daughters were dead. The words hit Alaric like a physical blow.
No.
We held the inner city. The girls were in the Western Sanctuary the entire time. They were never in danger. I didn't know that. Seraphine's chains rattled as she leaned forward, desperate. I didn't know. For 12 years, I thought I'd lost everything. Every day I survived was just existing in a world where my children were ash. Lyra and Ellen stood between their parents, living proof that the world had lied to both of them. Ellen's small hand was still wrapped around Seraphine's chained fingers. Lyra's sharp eyes tracked every word, every expression, assembling truth from fragments. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? Alaric asked, his voice hoarse. Your name, your position? I tried. Seraphine's laugh was bitter. The first market, I told them I was queen of the Nocturne territories. They beat me for delusions of grandeur. The second market, I demanded to send word to you. They added more chains. By the third market, I learned that claiming royal blood just made the abuse worse. She met his gaze directly. So, I became no one. A nameless war captive. Dangerous enough to fear but broken enough to sell. It kept me alive. I declared you dead, Alaric said, the confession dragging from him like broken glass. 3 weeks after Thornhaven. The council insisted. The kingdom needed stability. The girls needed. He stopped, looking at his daughters. They needed a parent who could function, who could rule. I couldn't do that while holding on to hope. So you buried me. I buried an empty coffin and tried to bury the grief with it. His hands clenched at his sides. I failed. Every day, I fail. But I kept ruling because our daughters needed a father more than I needed to grieve. Ellen looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes, Seraphine's eyes, and said quietly, You did your best, father. You both did. The simple absolution from a 7-year-old nearly broke him. This is quite touching, Corinne interjected, his voice cutting through the moment like a blade, but we have a legal matter to address. The magistrate stepped forward, producing a rolled parchment from his robes. His expression had shifted from nervous to calculating, a merchant sensing opportunity in chaos. Your Majesty, if this woman is indeed who she claims to be, then we have a significant complication. According to the Treaty of Ashfall, Article 17, Section 4, all war captives taken during the conflict are considered legal property of their current holders until formal ransom or purchase is negotiated. Alaric's eyes narrowed dangerously. That statute was meant for enemy combatants, for prisoners of war from opposing forces. The law makes no distinction regarding original nationality, Corinne said smoothly. It states simply, war captives. This woman was captured at Thornhaven. She has been legally transferred through 6 registered markets. Her current ownership papers are properly filed with the Crimson Council. He held up the parchment, its official seals glinting in the torchlight. She is, by statute, the legal property of this market. If you wish to reclaim her, Your Majesty, the law is clear. You must negotiate purchase terms. The crowd murmured. Some were shocked. Others barely concealed greed. This was a scandal and profit combined. Every merchant's dream. Seraphine went very still. You're saying I'm property. That I've been property this entire time. Even though I'm a war captive, Corinne finished.
Yes.
Your previous titles are irrelevant. The treaty supersedes all prior claims of nobility or sovereignty for those captured during the conflict. That's insane, Lyra said, her voice shaking with fury. She's the queen. You can't own. The law disagrees, princess. Corinne's smile was poisonous. And I suspect the Crimson Council will be very interested to learn that their Majesty's first queen, legally dead for 12 years, has suddenly reappeared. There will be questions, investigations, accusations of fraud, perhaps. After all, Your Majesty publicly declared her dead, held funeral rites, accepted the crown's passage. The threat was clear. make trouble, and Kareen would make it a political nightmare. Alaric's expression went cold, the face of a king who'd ended wars. Name your price. For a queen, Kareen's smile widened. I'm afraid her value just increased exponentially. 30,000 platinum crowns. Plus, he paused dramatically. A formal acknowledgement from the Crimson Council that all my market licenses remain valid and uncontested. You're extorting the crown. I'm conducting legal business, Your Majesty. The choice is yours. Kareen gestured at Seraphine with casual cruelty. Purchase her contract and face council scrutiny, or walk away. Either way, she remains chained until the matter is legally resolved. Seraphine's hands clenched into fists. 12 years of captivity had taught her patience, but this, being reduced to a bargaining chip between her husband and a corrupt merchant, ignited rage she could barely contain. Don't, she said, looking directly at Alaric. Don't negotiate with him. Don't give him the satisfaction of. I'll burn this market to ash before I leave you here. Alaric's voice was quiet, absolute. The voice of a man who'd already decided. Kareen's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered. Then you'll be in violation of treaty law. The council won't. The council, Alaric said softly, dangerously, serves at my pleasure. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Seraphine. Knelt before her, so they were eye to eye. I failed you once. I won't fail you again. Then he turned to Kareen, and his voice carried across the market with the weight of absolute authority. By the power vested in me as sovereign, I invoke Crown's right. This woman is not property. She is my wife. And your statute, he smiled coldly, just made her royal property by default. Kareen's face went pale. That's not. The law doesn't. The law, Alaric said, standing, just recognized a queen. Kareen's recovery was swift. Too swift. A man didn't run a captive market for decades without learning how to survive powerful enemies. Your Majesty, he said, his voice taking on the practiced patience of someone explaining basic law to a child. I understand your emotional position. However, Crown's right applies only to recognized royal persons. This woman was declared legally dead 12 years ago. That declaration was witnessed by the Crimson Council, sealed by your own hand, and entered into the official record. He gestured to the chained Seraphine with theatrical sympathy. To claim her now as your wife, you would first need to nullify the death declaration. That requires a formal council investigation, minimum 6 months, to verify identity, establish legitimacy, and rule on the legality of her resurrection, so to speak. The magistrate's smile was razor-thin. Until that investigation concludes, she remains what she has been for 12 years. War captive property, bound by treaty law. Your feelings, however genuine, do not supersede established legal process. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Merchants nodded. Even some of Alaric's own guards shifted uncomfortably, caught between royal command and the uncomfortable truth that Kareen's argument had legal weight. Furthermore, Kareen continued, sensing advantage. The Treaty of Ashfall includes the binding compact of Article 23. It states explicitly that market transactions, once initiated, cannot be dissolved by external authority, including the Crown, without full compensation and mutual consent. I have not consented to release this captive. Then name your compensation, Alaric said, his voice tight with controlled fury. I already did. 30,000 platinum crowns and protected market licenses. Kareen spread his hands as if the matter were simple. Or, alternatively, you could wait for the council investigation to conclude. I'm certain this woman will still be available for purchase in 6 months. Probably. The threat was clear. 6 months in chains, 6 months of captivity, 6 months of Kareen finding ways to make Seraphine's existence unbearable. You're a coward, Lyra said suddenly, her young voice cutting through the market's tension like a knife. Hiding behind laws that were written to protect people, not to chain them. Kareen turned to her with false gentleness. Princess, when you're older, you'll understand that law is what separates civilization from chaos. Without it, men like you couldn't profit from suffering. Lyra finished coldly. Don't lecture me about civilization, magistrate. I've been watching you. Every word you speak reeks of greed dressed as governance. The 9-year-old's composure was devastating. She stood between her chained mother and the corrupt merchant like a blade given human form. The lawyer sighting was meant to stabilize post-war commerce, to ensure fair treatment of prisoners, to create a process. Lyra's sharp eyes were merciless. You've twisted it into a slave trade.
That's not law.
That's corruption wearing the law's corpse. Several guards shifted uncomfortably. Merchants avoided eye contact. Even Corinne's practiced smile flickered. Ellen stepped forward, her small hand still holding her mother's chained fingers. When she spoke, her voice was clear and heartbreaking in its simplicity. We came here to help someone. Father taught us that family means protecting the people we love. That justice means doing what's right even when it's hard. She looked up at Alaric with those storm-gray eyes, Seraphine's eyes, and the weight of that gaze was unbearable. Is it right to leave her here, father? Is it just? Alaric felt the question tear through him. King against husband. Law against love. Every instinct he'd honed over 12 years of careful rule screamed that Corinne was baiting him into a political disaster. The council would riot. The treaties would fracture. The fragile peace he'd built on the corpse of war would collapse. But his daughters were looking at him. His wife, alive, gods, alive, was kneeling in chains 3 feet away. And the law that bound her was obscene. Corinne sensed Alaric's hesitation. Your Majesty, be reasonable. I'm offering you a legal path forward. Pay the compensation, wait for the investigation, and—
No.
Seraphine's voice was quiet but absolute. She'd been silent during the entire exchange, but now she lifted her head and looked directly at Alaric. Don't compromise yourself for me. Don't break the kingdom's laws. I survived 12 years. I can survive 6 more months if it means— If it means what? Alaric cut her off, his voice raw. If it means I do the right thing? Follow proper procedure? Let bureaucracy and corruption keep you in chains while I wait for permission to reclaim my own wife. It means you remain the king this realm needs, Seraphine said steadily. The one who builds instead of destroys. The one who uses law as foundation, not weapon. If you shatter the treaties now, everything you've built was built on the lie that you were dead. The admission hung in the air between them, brutal, honest, devastating. Alaric turned to face Corinne, and something in his expression made the magistrate step back involuntarily. You're right, Alaric said softly. Law separates civilization from chaos. So let me be very clear about what law we're operating under. He raised his voice, addressing not just Corinne but the entire market. The Treaty of Ashfall was ratified to end a war, to create peace, to ensure that captured soldiers were treated with dignity and given paths to freedom. His hand moved to the crown at his brow. But somewhere between peace and profit, men like Magistrate Corinne transformed dignified repatriation into commercial slavery. They turned war captives into property. They made suffering profitable. That's not what, Corinne started. Be silent. The command was absolute. Corinne's mouth snapped shut. You claim the law binds me, Alaric continued. That I must wait, must pay, must negotiate. But here's what you've forgotten, magistrate. I didn't just sign that treaty. I wrote it. And the intent, the fundamental purpose, was never to create markets like this. He stepped towards Seraphine, his daughters moving aside to let him through. Article 17 was meant to prevent executions of war prisoners, to give them value beyond their deaths. Article 23 protected against forced dissolution of legitimate repatriation efforts, not commercial trafficking. Alaric knelt beside Seraphine, his hands moving to the chains at her throat. You've corrupted every word of that treaty, turned protection into bondage, turned law into chains. Your Majesty, Corinne's voice had lost its smooth confidence. If you break those chains without legal process, you're in direct violation of a law that should never have existed this way. Alaric looked at Seraphine, really looked at her, and saw 12 years of survival written in scars and unbroken defiance. Saw the mother his daughters needed. Saw the queen his kingdom had lost. Saw the woman he'd buried in his heart and never stopped loving. I've spent 12 years being the king you needed me to be, he said quietly, meant only for her. Reasonable, measured,
Governed by law.
but love doesn't wait for council approval. The family doesn't negotiate with corruption. He straightened, his voice ringing across the market. By the authority vested in me as sovereign of the Nocturne territories, I hereby declare the Treaty of Ashfall's commercial captivity provisions void and unconscionable. Effective immediately. Gasps erupted. Guards froze. Kareen's face went white. Furthermore, Alaric continued, his hand raised in the formal gesture of absolute decree. I dissolve this market and all licenses associated with it. Every captive here is hereby freed. Every chain is ended. You can't, Kareen sputtered. The council will answer to me. Alaric's hand came down in a sharp, decisive gesture. Strike the chains. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a guard, one of Alaric's own, stepped forward with a heavy iron key. His hands shook as he unlocked the collar at Seraphine's throat. The silver-laced metal fell away with a clang that echoed like thunder. The market exploded. Seize the king. Kareen screamed, his composure shattering. He's committed treason against the treaty. Guards, your duty is to the law, not. But Alaric's personal guard had already moved, forming a protective circle around the royal family. The market's hired enforcers hesitated, caught between conflicting authorities, unsure whether the king's decree superseded their employment contracts. That hesitation was all the captives needed. A werewolf male tore his chains from the wall post with a roar of pure rage. A vampire woman grabbed her placard and smashed it against the stone platform. An elderly human captive simply collapsed, sobbing, hands clutching at wrists still marked by years of restraints. This is chaos. Kareen shrieked, backing toward the market's rear exit. This is the end of order. The council will have your crown for this, Nocturne. Then they can try to take it, Alaric said calmly. Captain Reeves, detain Magistrate Kareen. Charges: exploitation under false legal pretense, corruption of treaty law, and trafficking in persons of protected status. Captain Reeves, a scarred vampire who'd served Alaric since before Thornhaven, moved with lethal efficiency. Kareen tried to run. Made it perhaps 10 feet before Reeves had him pinned against a stall, face pressed into rotting canvas. You can't do this. Kareen spat. I have rights. I have licenses. I have nothing, Reeves said flatly, securing chains, Kareen's chains now, around the magistrate's wrists. You have absolutely nothing. Around them, the market descended into controlled chaos. Some captives ran for the exits. Others attacked their former handlers with 12 years of accumulated fury. Merchants scattered, abandoning their stalls, their ledgers, their carefully maintained inventories of human suffering. Seraphine remained kneeling, her freed hands moving slowly to her throat where the collar had been. The skin beneath was raw, scarred by silver burns that would take weeks to heal. She touched the wounds carefully, as if confirming they were real. Mother? Ellen's voice was small, uncertain. The word, mother, hung in the air like a question that didn't know if it deserved an answer. Seraphine's head snapped up. She looked at Ellen, then at Lyra, and something in her expression cracked wide open. Her voice broke. I don't know if I'm allowed to. A crash interrupted her. 3 of Kareen's enforcers, too loyal or too stupid to recognize when power had shifted, charged toward Alaric with shock batons raised. Seraphine moved. 12 years of captivity hadn't dulled her warrior instincts. She was on her feet in a blur of motion, positioning herself between the attackers and the girls. Her hands, still weak from chains, caught the first baton mid-swing and twisted. Bones snapped. The enforcer screamed. The second attacker barely had time to register what was happening before Seraphine's elbow connected with his jaw. The third tried to retreat. She swept his legs, drove him face first into stone, and had his own shock batten at his throat before Alaric's guards could intervene. "Touch my daughters," Seraphine hissed, her voice raw and feral, "and I will end you with my bare hands." The enforcer went very still, survival instinct overriding his bravado. Captain Reeves approached carefully, hands visible. "Your Majesty." He paused, uncertain which majesty he was addressing.
"Ma'am."
"We have them. You can stand down." Seraphine didn't move, didn't release her grip. Her breathing was ragged, adrenaline and 12 years of suppressed violence flooding her system. "Seraphine." Alaric's voice, quiet and steady. "They're safe. Our daughters are safe. Our daughters." The words penetrated her combat haze. Seraphine looked down at Lyra and Ellen, both wide-eyed but unharmed, watching their mother with something between awe and recognition, and slowly released her captive. Her hands were shaking. Her entire body was shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have." "You defended them," Lyra said simply. "Like a mother should." The statement was matter-of-fact, carrying no judgment, only observation. But it nearly broke Seraphine. Around them, Alaric's forces were restoring order with methodical efficiency. Captives were being moved to secure areas, not cells, but protected chambers where they could receive medical attention and legal counsel. Market enforcers were being disarmed and detained. Merchants were being questioned, their ledgers seized as evidence. The market that had existed for 20 years was dying in real time. "Your Majesty," a court official pushed through the chaos, his face pale with panic. "Sir, the Crimson Council is demanding an emergency session. They've heard about the decree. They're calling it unlawful dissolution of treaty obligations. There's talk of," he swallowed hard, "of invoking the sovereignty challenge." The words sent a chill through the crowd. Sovereignty challenge, an ancient provision allowing the council to formally question a monarch's fitness to rule. If successful, it could strip Alaric of his crown. "Let them challenge," Alaric said, his voice carrying across the market. "Let them explain to this kingdom why they believe it's lawful to chain a queen. Why do they think commerce in suffering is acceptable governance?" He turned, addressing not just his officials but every person present. "For 12 years, I've tried to build a kingdom on law and order, but I built it on a foundation that was rotten. The Treaty of Ashfall was meant to end war, not to perpetuate suffering. If the council believes otherwise, then they've forgotten what we fought for. They'll take your crown," the official warned. "Then I'll rule without it." The statement was radical. Impossible. A king without a crown was just a man, but a man with an army, a people, and a cause was something far more dangerous. Seraphine watched Alaric speak, saw him risking everything, crown, kingdom, carefully constructed peace for her, for their daughters, for a principle that transcended politics. She'd spent 12 years believing she'd lost this man to war and ash. But he was still here, still fighting, still refusing to accept evil just because it wore the mask of law. The market had finally cleared. Guards stood at every exit. Kareen was being dragged away in his own chains, screaming threats that no one acknowledged. The freed captives were being led to safety, some weeping, others silent with shock, all of them touching their freed wrists as if checking for phantom restraints. Alaric turned to Seraphine. His daughters stepped aside without needing to be told, understanding that this moment belonged to their parents. He crossed the space between them, 3 steps that bridged 12 years of grief and loss and survival. And then Alaric Nocturne, king of the Nocturne territories, knelt. Not in submission. Not in ceremony. He knelt as a man before the woman he'd buried, the wife he'd lost, the queen who'd survived hell and come back to break his world apart and remake it into something true. "Forgive me," he said, his voice breaking, "for declaring you dead, for moving forward, for not searching hard enough, For every day you were in chains while I wore a crown. Seraphine knelt with him, her scarred hands finding his face. There's nothing to forgive. You did what you had to do. We both did. I thought I'd lost you forever. You didn't. Her forehead pressed against his. I'm here. I'm alive. And our daughters, her voice caught. Our daughters are perfect. They stayed like that. Two monarchs kneeling in the ruins of a market, holding each other while the kingdom they'd built fractured and reformed around them. Behind them, Lyra took Ellen's hand and watched their parents remember how to be whole. The first week after Black Spire Market fell, Seraphine slept for 3 days straight. Not the shallow, wary half-sleep of captivity where every sound meant danger, but true rest, deep and dreamless in chambers that had once been hers. Alaric posted guards at her door not to keep her in, but to ensure no one disturbed the healing. Lyra and Ellen took turns sitting by her bedside, reading aloud from storybooks, their voices a gentle tether to a world that didn't require constant vigilance. When Seraphine finally woke, she found Ellen asleep in the chair beside her bed, small hand still clutching the book she'd been reading. The sight nearly broke her. Recovery was slow, painful. The silver burns on her wrists and throat required specialized treatment. The scars across her shoulders, some decades old, told stories she wasn't ready to speak aloud. But worse than the physical wounds was the way she flinched at sudden movements, the way her hands automatically positioned for combat when servants entered her chambers, the way trust felt like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Lyra noticed everything. You don't have to pretend you're fine, she said one evening, her 9-year-old directness cutting through Seraphine's careful composure. We know you're not. That's okay. Seraphine had stared at her daughter, this sharp, observant child she barely knew, and felt something loosen in her chest. I don't know how to be your mother anymore. I don't know if I ever really was. Then learn with us, Lyra said simply. We're learning how to have you, too. It became their unspoken agreement. No pretense. No forcing connection that needed time to grow. They walked the palace gardens together, Seraphine relearning her daughter's rhythms, Lyra's quiet intensity, Ellen's open-hearted curiosity. They ate dinners that sometimes dissolved into comfortable silence. They existed in the same space without demanding perfection from each other. Alaric watched from a careful distance, giving them room to rebuild what war had shattered. But at night, when the palace slept, he and Seraphine would walk the battlements as they'd done 12 years ago. They didn't speak much. Words felt inadequate for the gulf between them. 12 years of separate survival, separate grief, separate lives. But their hands would find each other in the darkness, and that was enough. The court, however, was less forgiving. The Crimson Council had convened emergency sessions. Whispers of rebellion echoed through noble houses. Some called Alaric's decree tyrannical overreach. Others called it necessary reform. The kingdom split along fault lines of profit and principle. 3 council members are demanding your abdication, Chancellor Veridon reported during a tense session. 5 more are publicly questioning the legality of dissolving treaty provisions without full council vote. Let them question, Alaric said. The markets violated the treaty's intent. That was always my authority to address. And the Queen. Veridon's voice was careful. Her return complicates succession law. There are those who claim her death declaration was legitimate, that she cannot simply. Cannot what? Seraphine's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. She'd entered quietly, Lyra and Ellen flanking her. Cannot reclaim what was stolen? Cannot exist because bureaucracy finds my survival inconvenient. Her storm gray eyes swept the council chamber. I spent 12 years as property. I will not spend another day with a political problem. The room fell silent. That night, as the family walked the battlements together, Alaric and Seraphine with their daughters between them, a messenger arrived. Breathless. Urgent. Your Majesty. Reports from the eastern provinces. The markets there, they're refusing the dissolution decree. Magistrates are forming a coalition. They're calling it, he swallowed hard, the compact resistance. They claim you've violated sacred law. They're preparing to challenge your authority. Alaric looked at Seraphine, at their daughters, at the family he'd fought so hard to reclaim. Then we remind them, he said quietly, what happens when the kingdom chooses love over cruelty. Seraphine's hand found his. Together. Together, Lyra and Ellen echoed. The battle for the kingdom's soul was just beginning. The great hall of Blackspire Keep had never held so many people. Every noble house sent representatives. Every province dispatched delegates. Merchants, soldiers, freed captives, common citizens. They packed the chamber until guards had to open the outer courtyards and erect viewing screens so the overflow crowds could witness what was about to unfold. History was being written. Everyone wanted to see whose hand held the pen. Alaric stood at the dais, crown upon his brow, the weight of it familiar but no longer comfortable. Beside him stood Seraphine, not behind, not separate, but beside, wearing the circlet of the queen that had been locked away for 12 years. The silver had tarnished. She'd refused to have it polished. Let it show the years, she'd said. Let it be honest. Lyra and Ellen stood one step below their parents, positioned where the kingdom could see them clearly. Two young princesses who'd pointed at chains and demanded freedom. Who'd recognized their mother when the entire kingdom had forgotten she existed. The murmuring crowd fell silent as Alaric raised his hand. 12 years ago, he began, his voice carrying through the hall with the resonance of absolute authority, we signed the Treaty of Ashfall to end a war that had consumed a generation. We believed we were building peace. We believed law would protect us from our worst impulses. He paused, letting the words settle. We were wrong. Gasps rippled through the assembly. Nobles shifted uncomfortably. But Alaric continued, unflinching. The treaty's provisions for war captives were meant to ensure dignity, to create paths toward repatriation and freedom. But somewhere between intent and implementation, we allowed those provisions to become something obscene. We permitted commerce in suffering. We transformed survivors into property. We built markets on the bones of the vulnerable and called it lawful. His gaze swept across the crowd, meeting eyes that couldn't hold his stare. I share responsibility for this. I authorized those markets. I believed oversight would prevent abuse. I was a fool. Seraphine's hand found his, a gesture of solidarity visible to every person present. But foolishness can be corrected, Alaric continued. Cruelty can be ended. Therefore, effective immediately, I decree the following. All captive markets within the Nocturne territories are hereby abolished. All commercial trafficking in persons, regardless of species, origin, or circumstance, is illegal and punishable by forfeiture of assets and imprisonment. The hall erupted. Merchants shouted protests. Nobles called for order. But Alaric's voice rose above the chaos. Furthermore, all individuals currently held under captive contracts are freed. Their debts are voided. Their identities are restored. The Crown will provide repatriation assistance, housing, and legal counsel to any who require it. You'll bankrupt the kingdom, someone shouted from the crowd. Then we'll be bankrupt with our dignity intact, Seraphine said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The hall quieted, shocked that the returned queen had spoken. I spent 12 years as property. I know the exact cost of the system you're defending. It's paid in blood, trauma, and the slow death of everything that makes us worthy of calling ourselves civilized. She stepped forward, and the crowd instinctively gave her space, not from fear, but from the sheer force of her presence. Some of you believe this decree is radical, destabilizing, a threat to order. But I ask you, what kind of order requires chains? What kind of stability demands we profit from suffering? What kind of peace is built on the captivity of our own people? Her storm-gray eyes found faces in the crowd, nobles who'd grown rich on market licenses, merchants who'd traded in human misery, officials who'd turned blind eyes to corruption. You had 12 years to do the right thing. You chose comfort over conscience. So now the choice is being made for you. Lyra stepped forward then, her young voice surprisingly steady. My mother taught me something in the market, though she didn't know she was teaching it at the time. She taught me that strength isn't about controlling others. It's about protecting them. Real power doesn't chain people. It sets them free. Ellen joined her sister. And my father taught me that love is stronger than law when the law is wrong. That family means choosing people, not just being born to them. That mercy isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. The two girls stood between their parents, living proof that love could survive war, captivity, and 12 years of separation. That family could be broken and reforged into something stronger than before. This decree will face challenges, Alaric acknowledged. The compact resistance is already forming in the eastern provinces. There will be economic disruption, political backlash, threats to my crown, and possibly my life. He looked at Seraphine, at their daughters, at the future they were choosing together. But I learned something in that market. I learned that a kingdom's strength isn't measured by its laws. It's measured by who those laws protect. And I will no longer rule a kingdom that protects profit over people. The council will, someone began. The council will adapt, Seraphine interrupted, her voice carrying royal authority that 12 years of chains hadn't diminished. Or they will be replaced by those who understand that governance is service, not dominion. That law exists to uplift, not to exploit. She turned to address the crowd directly. I am not a symbol of suffering. I am proof that survival is possible. That breaking chains, a literal and metaphorical, is not just necessary but achievable. And I will spend the rest of my reign ensuring that no one in this kingdom ever has to choose between conscience and law again. The hall was silent now. Not the silence of shock, but of recognition. Of something fundamental shifting in the bedrock of the kingdom. Alaric raised his hand once more. I will sign the abolition decree at dawn tomorrow. Any house, any province, any individual who wishes to stand against it may leave this hall now. But understand, if you stand against freedom, you stand against the crown. There is no middle ground. No one left. Not because they all agreed. Not because conscience had suddenly awakened in every corrupt heart, but because they understood that power had chosen its side, and it was not theirs. Dawn found the royal family on the eastern battlements of Blackspire Keep, the same place Alaric and Seraphine had stood 12 years ago, the night before Thornhaven. But this time they stood together, complete. Below them, the forges burned. The chains from the dissolved market, thousands of pounds of iron and silver, were being melted down. Not destroyed. Transformed. What will you make from them? Ellen asked, watching sparks rise into the morning sky. Seraphine smiled, her first real smile in 12 years. Gates. Wide gates. The kind that open outward, not lock inward. So everyone who enters this kingdom knows they're walking into a place that chooses freedom. Will it work? Lyra asked, her sharp mind already calculating the political ramifications. The decree, the reforms, will it actually change anything? Yes, Alaric said simply. Because we chose to try. Because you two were brave enough to point at chains and say, that one is ours. Because sometimes love has to break the world before it can remake it into something better. He pulled his daughters close, Seraphine's arm around all of them. We won't solve everything. The compact resistance will fight us. The economic transition will be painful. There will be setbacks and failures and moments when we question if we did the right thing. But we did, Seraphine said quietly. Will. The right thing doesn't stop being right just because it's difficult. The sun crested the horizon, turning Blackspire's stones golden. In the forges below, molten metal flowed into new molds, chains becoming gates, bondage becoming passage, fear becoming welcome. Tell me, Ellen said softly, looking up at her mother, about the stars, about Lyra and Ellen. Why did you choose those names? Seraphine knelt, bringing herself eye level with her daughters. Because even in the darkest night, stars still burn. Even when you can't see them, they're still there, distant but constant, unreachable but real. I named you for stars because I wanted you to be light, that survives anything, even war, even loss, even 12 years of thinking you were gone. Her voice caught. You are a light that never stopped burning. Even when I couldn't see you, you were still there. Still brilliant. Still mine. Lyra and Ellen wrapped their arms around their mother, this scarred, fierce, unbreakable woman who'd survived hell and come home. Alaric knelt with them, his family complete in the dawn light. Below, the gates began to take shape.
Wide.
Open. Welcome. A kingdom that had chosen chains was learning to choose freedom, and the family that had been broken by war was whole again, not because the past had been erased, but because they'd chosen each other over everything that tried to keep them apart. What happens now? Ellen asked. Seraphine looked at Alaric. Alaric looked at his daughters. And together, they looked toward the horizon where the sun was rising on a kingdom remade. Now, Alaric said, we build something worth inheriting. Together, Seraphine added. Always, their daughters promised. And in the forges below, the last of the chains melted away. We did it, Story family. We journeyed from chains to freedom, from grief to reunion, from broken to whole. If you love this story, drop in the comments. If you're grateful you stuck around till the end, smash that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story is just as incredible, and you don't want to miss it. Tell me where you're watching from, and what you loved most about Seraphine's journey. This community is global, and I love seeing you all come together over these stories. See you tomorrow.